Doing research since 1983. What? You can be a good researcher and publish papers, but not have a PhD.
You say that research or science for everyone?
No, certainly not.
So thank you so much for accepting to be on our channel today. It's always a joy to to have our cool professors talking to us. But before we step in, can you just introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, my name's Gray Williams. So I work at the Swire Institute of Marine Science in Hong Kong University, and I'm an intertidal ecologist. So I work on seashores.
Great. So why Hong Kong? Because your accent.
So Hong Kong was it was my first opportunity to get a real job, and I was doing a postdoc in the United Kingdom, and they were establishing a new marine lab in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And so I applied for the position, and I got very lucky, and I got it. And so we decided we'd go and try 5 years in Hong Kong, and I've been there now for 35 years, so it must be okay.
Oh, I see. So 35 years in Hong Kong. Probably you wanted to be there for 5 years. What really attracted you to stay back for?
So I think as a marine biologist, the place is just a very exciting place to work. It's completely different environment to temperate regions, and I think there were so many opportunities to learn new things. Whereas in temperate regions, a lot of the basic biology is understood, but in the tropics, it's relatively understood. And so it was almost like having a new challenge, a new environment to work in, which I thought was very dynamic. The other thing is my work looks at thermal ecology, and of course the tropics is the ideal place to look at thermal stress.
Great. Ecology. Why ecology? What inspired you?
Why not? Why not ecology? Ecology to me is sort of fundamental. I think the only other thing which is more fundamental is probably evolutionary biology. But I think ecology, you get the opportunity to look at both species and their interactions and how that modifies and how that changes in different environments. And I think that's a sort of holistic view, really, of a lot of biology.
Okay, so just walk us through a bit from your education. Growing up, what really gave you that passion from choosing the program? What you're researching now, right from the BSc to masters to PhD. What motivated you?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that motivation was field work. Was actually being out in the environment, looking at organisms in their natural habitats. So I chose a degree course which had a lot of ecology in it, and also had a field course, a number of field courses in it as well. And even now, one of my favorite things is actually teaching on field courses, is actually taking students away to different environments and actually working with them in those different environments. So I think probably that's that link with ecology, is it's out being in the natural environment.
Great. So growing up, you have always believed that science can really make an impact in the world. Do you used to believe that science can make?
So I think science is fundamental to a lot of decision making and providing the information which we can trust to make decisions. And I think how science is then used is probably where the impact may come. But unless we have science, we're not going to be able to make any of those decisions very objectively. So I think science helps us remove subjective opinion and move forward with sort of sound numerical answers for what we're looking at.
Right, so the people who perceive that science is all about only brilliant people getting to know what is happening around them, and it doesn't really translate into our daily lives. What would you say?
So I think probably that's quite an old-fashioned view of science. I think that maybe 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, scientists were very much self-serving and were looking at just following their own interests. But I think now more and more, as we realize the sort of the needs of society and also the challenges faced by things like climate change, I think scientists are realizing their work needs to be translational in that effect, to actually try and be involved in making the world a better place and trying also to combat some of these challenges we're facing.
Most times when people think about science, they're thinking about huge development, like engineering, building planes here and there. They don't really give regard to, especially natural sciences. They don't find that as, fancy. So far as it's not affecting their lives. With your field of study now, what would be your advice to people out there? I mean, as related to science, should their expectations still be something big coming out of ecology, or are you studying to give us something big?
Well, I think something big is the impression of the person who looks at it. Some people will actually find that some small discovery which explains, for example, why enzymes work at very high temperatures is actually, for some people, a very big discovery, because then we understand how some species can survive in some environments and some species can't. And then we might also be able to look at how genetically that could take place. So I think it's about perception, and I think it's about the questions you're asking that determines whether it's a big question or a small question from that point of view.
Yeah, it's even in the field of science, a lot of scientists just they are just chasing publication, chasing huge foundings. What do you say?
Yeah, I think you're right. That is something which, of course, in any form of society today, there is a requirement to be funded. There's a requirement that there is a salary, or there is some way of being able to have the money to actually continue that. And I think that's one of the ways science has also changed now, is that much more science is applied and actually does need to have some impact. And I think it's both a good and a bad thing, because I think we shouldn't get rid of blue sky science just for the sake of it. But we probably need to have the right blend. I think with all these things, extremes are not good, and trying to find a middle path is probably the way forward.
Okay. So you think research is for only PhD students?
Sorry?
You think research is for only PhD students?
No. I mean, research. I mean, anyone can do research in some way, but I mean, the whole process of research really is to do the work and then to publish it so that other people actually learn from it and then can take it further or can try and refute it. So I think that we do need that sort of scientific process to be in place. But research, of course, is PhD students, NGOs. If we actually see that work published, also can contribute as well. So there may be different sectors which can contribute towards it.
So in this sense, do you believe everyone should have a PhD, especially if you want to be a good researcher?
Uh, Not necessarily, no. I mean, you can be a good researcher and publish papers, but not have a PhD. But the question is, where does your funding come from? Because quite often you need to be in a situation in a university, for example, and to be appointed at a university, you need degrees to show that you have the background to be able to carry out that work. But it doesn't automatically mean people without PhDs cannot do research, because some very talented people could carry out research, but they wouldn't be in an academic situation. So there's this sort of contrast there in that respect.
So PhD and industry, which one would you really recommend? In other words, research and industrial job.
Well,
Which one would you
I'm
recommend?
an ecologist, right?
Yeah.
So I'm already in that research area.
Okay.
There's no way that I would be changing that. But I think that obviously in forms of research and in forms of industry, that some of the processes are very similar, and they're working towards, end goals. So I think there are similarities in each of them. But I think what we need to see is translating a lot of research into perhaps industrial or biomedical or conservation and management strategies. So I think now there's an inevitability that we need to be using our scientific knowledge to move forward for society growth.
Oh, great. Most of the questions seems to be more personal, but we just want to get the right perspective as, people who are coming up, students and many people already in the field who probably are already missing it. So whoever wants to pursue PhD, as we've just indicated, is if you want to further in research, whoever wants to pursue PhD, what should really be your motivation? What should push you to do what you have to do? To go for PhD. Because I know a lot of people go for PhD to get named, just for title, just to...
So yeah, I think people can make their own decisions about why they're doing a PhD. Some people, as you quite correctly said, will do it because they want to forward their career path. And to do that, they need a higher degree of some sort. And if that's what they need to do, that's fine. But a PhD should be more than that. It should be this academic endeavor where you are trying to discover new things. So you are actually going to make a contribution by your research that will be novel and new. And I think that really that should be the sort of driving process for why you should do it, because you have to commit sort of very intensely to it, and you have to drive it yourself as well. And so there does need to be that desire to do the PhD from that point of view.
gone are the days when we did know that scholars or chief researchers, professors, were known to be people of high standard, very isolating. They don't really associate. They dressed anyhow. They behave against the norm of society. In our recent time, how do you think science and relations should be?
Yeah. There's this impression that the older academics were quite eccentric, and I think that in many cases that was true. And I think now we've got a society which expects them to be more conformist and expects them not to be doing research which is on sort of a very sort of a topic which they can't understand. And I think we're more now linked to making sure that our science is understood by the public. And because of the way the funding models work, the public is quite entitled to say, why should we fund this piece of research that we don't understand? How is it going to help us? And so I think now that there is a shift where there is a need to meet those societal demands in that respect.
Okay, and local, regional, and international research. I don't know with your field now, whether you already do collaboration across countries, across continents. If you do, what would be your recommendation? That is, if you are not doing, what do you think should be done?
So I think collaboration is very important because I think it's very important to see different perspectives. And you also have to be sensitive to those different perspectives as well. So you learn a lot by working in different cultures and looking at how different people view things. And I think it also opens up the opportunity to learn new skills and to see how you can apply the work which you've done through somebody else's eyes, if you like, or through the lens of what's happening in that country. And so I think it's very important because it broadens your perspectives and it allows you to achieve more than you would just by working in your own small, isolated area.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, before this interview, we have a conversation, and you really made a quote that has really stuck with me, that what's one thing, if you don't do, you will regret it forever. Would you say that research or science is for everyone?
No, certainly not. I think people, as I said, I think you need a certain amount of drive to want to do it, and also you have to push yourself. And I think that for many people, that's not something which they need to do or they want to do. And I think that's fine. Everyone gets a chance to find their own directions. Mm-hmm. So I think that means for many people, they don't like science or it's not for them, but they have skill sets in other areas. And I think that's also, what makes the world go round is we have those varieties of different interests.
Great. So those who really want to pursue research or those who have interest in research, how do they find the right area, the right?
It's really difficult, and I think it's one of the things which we find that people say, yes, I want to do research, but I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And I think it's such a vast field. It's often very difficult to be able to narrow it down. So I guess I went from ecology to marine ecology to intertidal ecology. So it's sort of focused down with time. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it's very hard for people when they start to find out, what's first my broad focus and then how, because there are so many interesting fields, people just get very confused by them all. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's an advantage if you at least have a sort of idea about what sort of field you like and then narrow it down from there. But it is a challenge. And I think sometimes in many parts of the world, it comes down to where is the funding? And if you want to do science, you tend to have to follow the funding in some respects.
You've just mentioned where you jumped from to and where you are now. Just to draw us to more knowledge on what you do. Can you, in just a normal understanding, for someone who doesn't know a lot about research, how would you explain your field of study?
Sure.
And your research?
Sure. So I'm interested in how animals survive in very hot environments. And I try to use the seashore as a model system. And so I work on organisms that live at the very top of the seashore. So they will spend long periods of time in hot, baking air in the tropics. And I think that looking at how they manage to do that will tell us a little bit about which species will be able to survive in the future. And it'll be able to tell us about which species won't. And so from that, we might be able to understand what future communities may look like. What will the species in them be based on that information?
And how long have you been doing this?
So I've been doing research since 1983.
What?
So a little while. That's when I started my PhD. So a little while, and I started in the temperate region, and so thermal ecology was not around then, and climate change wasn't even on the agenda. And so my research has sort of been molded by that. And one of the reasons for this interest is because, of course, climate change is now such a big threat that we're facing. And so, some of the science, our science should inform potential prediction and management in the future.
Then one of the key, I don't know whether to call it a skill or a feature I've learned from you is your ability to, articulate the science and the communication and keep people glued to what you really want to explain to them. Would you say you learned this alongside the studies, or it's a personal?
I think, we talked about why people might do science, and one of the reasons is you want to do it. And so I think I have an enjoyment for doing it and an enthusiasm for doing it. Great. And I work in a university, and I think the roles of an academic in a university is to do research, but it's also to teach. Okay. And if you don't tell people about your research, you may as well not do it, whether you publish it or you teach about it. And so I think it's very important that we do that. And I think in the future, it's becoming even more important that we convey that to the general public as well, not just students, so that everyone's aware of the problems we're facing and the fact that scientists are trying to help us deal and tackle those problems.
Great. I'm so happy you've touched on that, because now science is almost more into papers than communicating to the community and making a change out of, the reason why you do the research. So that's fine. But along your research line from 1983,
yeah, that's when I started my PhD.
Unfortunately, I wasn't born, so I don't know either. So, but from 1983 to now, what would you say has been, one, the challenge? From 83 to now, how do you see the growth of science, the growth of research? What have been your challenges, and how have you managed to maneuver them?
So you use the word growth of science, and I think science has grown, but science tends to grow in sort of steps. And I think we've seen a number of sort of innovations. For example, the growth and the popularity of genomic science, looking at real evolutionary change at that level. And I think one of the problems we have is we tend to follow these trends quite a lot, and they become the new focus. And the old focus tends to be either forgotten or treated as not quite as important. And I think one of the challenges we have is to integrate our past knowledge with our future knowledge to actually get a much more balanced picture of what is important in the system. So maintaining things like traditional taxonomy together with genomic work will be much stronger than just focusing on a genomic pathway, which many studies do these days. And I think having those, not forgetting the older roots of science, I think are very important for us.
Yeah, so, it's good that has been answered already. So, I know that along the line, even though we started in 83, it has its own challenges. Growing up, it has got its own challenges. The upcoming, what challenges do you perceive, especially with those who are coming in, with those who want to be scientists? What should we expect?
Well, I think we still face that challenge of integration of traditional science with the more modern branches of science. I think we also face challenges from how we use AI and how we integrate that into our science as well. But I think perhaps the greatest challenge we face is time, certainly in terms of biology, is how we combat climate change. And I think that's probably our greatest challenge, because the rate and the speed and the changes we're seeing are really quite scary. And I think that's probably, how can we make our science effective in translating through to politicians, managers, and then actually into action that will actually help us to combat that. Because we know what we need to do, but we need to find a way of convincing people to do that.
Yeah, just talking about politicians, it just reminded me of a question. Yes. Do you also believe that science and politics should be mixed?
I think they have to be mixed, but not necessarily by the same people. I think one would hope that politicians will use science, because then you can make an objective assessment of something based on knowledge. And I think that's where our jobs as scientists is to provide that knowledge. And of course, how well we do our science will determine how good that knowledge is. But I think the problem is that we don't want to become advocates. What we're doing is providing evidence. And then the next stage is how that evidence is used. And so a better relationship and a better understanding between politicians and scientists will lead to a better future. The problem is, as we know, politicians have agendas, and so this also has a big effect on how they use the science. And this is, I think, where we come down to these issues of maintaining, this is a scientific fact. It's not a matter of opinion.
Great. So in other words, it will be very difficult to be ethical as a scientist and be a politician at the same time.
Yeah, I think you may tend to stray towards advocacy then, and I think if you can maintain, I think the scientists who've moved into or been involved in politics have mostly been ones which have taken on a sort of advisory role. So they're not directing their primary science towards testing a hypothesis which might help the future. They're doing that anyway. What they're doing is trying to assimilate the scientific information to make it available and understandable to the politicians. And that, again, doesn't require advocacy. It's like the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What they're doing is they're putting together all the information in a way that can be understood by managers. And I think that's what a scientist's jobs should be, is to provide that information which can be used then for future management and political decisions.
One thing I know, growing up as someone who wants to pursue a career in science, is that funding or science in itself is very expensive. Coming up, what should we do? How do you think is the best way to get funding for research?
I think you're quite right. The funding agencies and the funding available is key to finding out how we can do science. And I think one of the problems we have these days is that most funding is tied to very short time frames and to very strict agendas. And I think there's a lot to be said for having more large-scale projects funded for longer time periods where we can actually really develop our science rather than working on a 3-year cycle, which I think means that we have very short scale and very short-sighted views of what's important.
This question has been on my mind. Let me ask you. I do believe that, as I just mentioned about funding, most scientists are founded by independent bodies, businessmen, people who own the industry and all that. You don't think there are points in time when probably your conclusion may have to be skewed to favor people who found you?
So clearly, I think with certain groups, that's true, that there is funding from large, either industrial firms or commercial firms. And I think that then becomes a challenge for the scientists to work out where that line is drawn, because you, as a scientist, you cannot have your data change. You cannot have the interpretation change because the science is the science. And that's why when one looks at those sort of funding agencies, you have to make a decision about how you are going to manage that. If you're looking at government funding, it's for certain topics, but your work is not changed. It's very clear that it just goes straight through. So I think it's about where the money comes from and what's expected afterwards. As you said, you pointed out that there've been examples where there is this pressure on, and if that's the case, then you shouldn't be taking the money.
Great. You are a researcher and you are a lecturer as well. I know I'm not hoping that you leave soon because we need you, but along the line, you may have to leave the field for the next ones to,
Sure.
take over.
Yeah.
With the students you've trained so far, the students you have, is there hope for science?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's some really, really bright people out there. I think I was trying to think about the issue is how does one make that translated into really effect? I think everyone is making a contribution on a small scale, and that you can really see that that's having some impact. But on a large scale, and looking at the global climate situation, then the question should be really, is there hope for us in that scenario?
Yeah.
And that's a really tough one to answer, because we all see these very good projects which are having impacts, but then we're also seeing the fact we're failing in many other areas. And this is where the politics gets separated from the science, as you pointed out. So you end up with this situation is maybe the problem is, yes, there's hope and that there are very good young scientists about, there very good people trying to make a difference, but actually is it being translated into really effective strategy? Or it is being put into strategy, but is it being actually put forward into action is where maybe we don't have as much hope, perhaps.
Now, you've already mentioned the hope in students. You've already mentioned challenges science faces now, and whether science can play a huge role in the things that are coming towards us as humans. With climate change, with biodiversity loss, with heating of oceans, again, the same question: do we have hope in science for these problems?
I think everybody would have to make their own decision about that. I think we always have to have hope. If we don't have hope, it's hopeless, right?
Yeah.
And so we can't go down that path. That avenue is just not acceptable. And so I think we have to have hope. We have to try and make an effort. We have to hope that we can change this. The reality may not be that, but unless we hope, you lose all movement forward. So we have to hope. So yes, we do.
Towards the ending part of our discussion, I really wish I could have you the whole day because listening to you has always been nice. However, I need to be coming to an end.
Yeah.
But before I leave you, where do you find some of your papers and the works you do, in case you want to read more about your papers?
Oh, right.
and your research?
Okay, I think they're scattered in very different journals. Obviously, a lot of the marine journals and a lot of the ecology journals. But some also, I think that the question when you publish a paper is you want to publish in a well-respected journal, but you also want to publish a paper in a journal which will allow the people who need this knowledge to be able to access it. And I think that's one of the issues we face in science is trying to get our work to the right audience. And so that then you tend to choose those sort of journals to try and get those papers published in those areas. So yeah, I don't think there's one which I can particularly select. It's very diverse.
Yeah. That shows the massive work you've done.
Sorry?
That shows the massive work you've done.
No, I don't. I'm not sure about that. I think it does show diversity, but also collaborations. You tend to be publishing in other journals which go across disciplines.
Okay.
And I think that's part of it as well. And also local journals, because in Southeast Asia, it's important that information is available on a local context, which might not be published in an international journal, but is very important in a local context. That's another thing to consider.
So students and maybe other researchers who may want to collaborate with you to do one or two, are you open for that?
I'm retiring in a year and a half, so I'm very keen to collaborate. I love collaborating and I love teaching, but I can't sort of take on any new projects myself because I'm retiring.
Okay.
But I'm very keen to be involved in projects still for the future.
Even asked me that leads me to a question: what happens after this number of years of research, a lot of impact? What happens after your retirement? Are you just gonna?
I'm gonna watch rugby, and I'm gonna try and learn how to play the PlayStation.
I think we need this your brain in the laboratory when you are going to help those who are coming up. But so before you go on retirement, were you holding any positions and what were you doing?
Yeah. I mean, I hope to maintain, for example, the Tropimundo class is a fantastic class to teach. I enjoy doing that. I want to continue teaching on field courses. And also I've my research field, my research projects, some of my postdocs and my collaborators will continue that work as well because we've been working together for a number of years. So I think, science keeps moving forward. It keeps moving forward and it keeps changing according to our new knowledge. And so I'm sure this will continue. And if I still have a chance to play a role, I'd be very happy to. Yeah. But it obviously won't be me that's driving it in that respect.
Great. So I keep saying we are about to leave, but we'll be leaving soon. What are the emerging areas in your field? Upcoming scientists or students who may want to pursue an area in your field, what are the emerging areas they can focus on?
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit earlier trying to link traditional with more modern techniques. And I think what I would like to see is more sort of relating behavioral patterns to genomic changes, transcriptomic changes in animals' physiology. And that's been sort of my key thing, is linking physiology with behavior. And I think with the new methodologies which are becoming available, I'm hoping people will start to apply those, given the ecological knowledge we have, but using the ecology linked in with these new methods as well.
Great. So leaving you finally,
that's what you say. Yeah.
What would be your final words to young scientists to the scientific community and across board, politicians, people, communities, your last words to the world.
I'm not going to die after this, am I?
No.
This is a little bit. I thought this was just an interview. I didn't think it was anything more than that.
No. Yeah,
I
so
mean,
your advice.
I guess one of the points you mentioned was about hope, right? And I think that as a scientist, I've certainly seen the importance of climate change accelerate. When I was first doing my PhD, it wasn't even on the agenda, and it's become more and more important. And I think what I would hope is that our science is going to contribute to ways which will then allow the politicians to do something which will actually negate or at least hold back climate change, because I think that's such an important thing. Now, you mentioned biodiversity loss, habitat loss, but I mean societal losses as well. So I think that's one of the things which will be, working together to try and achieve that.
Great. You teach in Hong Kong, right?
Yep.
Is there some small lexicons from China you can hear? Some small, is it Mandarin?
Mandarin, yeah.
Mandarin,
Well,
they
yeah,
speak Mandarin.
but we speak Cantonese in Hong Kong, and I speak very little Cantonese.
So some few Cantonese to the
Sorry?
Cantonese people who speak Cantonese are called.
The Cantonese, yeah. So it's an old. So Guangzhou is the province, and it used to be called Canton.
Okay, but can you say something small in the language to them in case they come across
Something small, yeah. Susu, which is something small.
Yeah. Great. So thank you so much for having you on my channel once again. I'm very, very grateful. Seriously, to all viewers, this is a man you can chat a whole day with, you never get tired. He has always got something to hook you up. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We hope that after retirement, we will still see you functioning hard.
Fantastic, Raphael. Thank you so much.